This is a video that will demonstrate how to assemble a bodice and construct the set-in sleeve. So what I have here is I have my half-scale bodice pieces, and I'm going to start with those first. So I'm going to go ahead and set my sleeve, my short sleeve pieces over to the side. First, when I look at these patterns, I can tell that my opening, so for this bodice opening, is going to be on the front because the center front marking, the center front line is marked, and then it has this 5/8 seam allowance for folding back. Also, just be aware when we look at these bodice patterns that we have some stay stitching that will occur around the neckline. Otherwise, we have 5/8 inch seam allowance around the shoulder, armhole, and side seam. So when we go ahead and open up these pieces, this is my back piece and it was placed on the fold. So then I can go ahead and set my my pattern to the side, and you want to make sure that you've done all your markings. I'm going to just go back real quick and make sure that you guys have identified the armhole markings, because that's what's really going to come in key. There's these two little notches here that you're going to want to cut out, of just like notch out with your scissors, so that you can have those markings for your sleeve, because you're going to use those to match up on the front and back. So what you'll do is you'll just place, you're just going to place your pattern piece right on top of your fabric piece, and then just cut in to the fabric and your pattern, identifying those double notches. And double notches are usually always found on the back pieces, and then you'll have single notches on the front. So if you haven't notched out your front pieces, make sure that you do that too. It's just so in the front we'll just have one notch along that armhole line, and then the back will have two. When looking at your sleeve pattern piece, hopefully you followed the instructions, and when you cut this out, these were two separate pieces, but you need to match them up end to end before you cut your piece. And there's a notch here, which will match up with the front of your bodice, and then there's that double notch here, which will match up with the back of your bodice. So just make sure that you have all those markings and notches in place before you go ahead and start constructing. Alright, so let's go ahead and go back to our back bodice piece, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up with the wrong side up, just so I can kind of get my bearings and get everything placed how it would be worn. This is how I usually lay out my pieces, so that I make sure that I have a distinct right and a distinct left. And I'm taking my front pieces, my front bodice pieces, and I'm placing them just as they would end up being constructed. So I have that center front opening, and then I can see how my shoulder seams are supposed to match up on my bodice. But in order to sew them so that our seam allowances are on the inside, we have to flip them. So then I know which ones to match up. So I'm just going to go ahead and close my seams along my shoulder, as well as along my side seam. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. We're going to assemble this bodice first. So go ahead and I use my tracing paper and soft tracing wheel to put some extra markings, just in case I forget what my seam allowance markings are, which they're 5/8, but I also have them traced onto my pattern pieces as well, and those are traced on the wrong sides, so that when I'm stitching with the right sides together, I can see those markings. And it might be difficult to see, but you can kind of see it along the neckline here, just those small little dots. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch up these shoulder seams at 5/8 of an inch. And I'm going to do back stitching at the front and at the back of this stitch line. And as I approach those pins that I put in to keep in place, I'm going to go ahead and pull those out. And then do some back stitching at the end of this line. Alright. Raise my needle and presser foot and trim those thread tails. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for the other shoulder seam now. And I always stitch from the shoulder towards the neckline, just to keep the consistent pull on the fabric for when we do stitch. We want to make sure that it's consistent on both the right and the left side, so that there's no any additional or strange pulling that occurs for our garment. So whatever you decide to do, just make sure that you do it on both sides, either from neckline to shoulder or shoulder to neckline. But I think when we do directional sewing, that it's typically from shoulder to neckline. Alright, so I have my shoulder seams constructed, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same for my side seams. So go ahead and line up those edges of your side seams and stitch those at 5/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the top and at the bottom of those, and make sure that your fabric is aligned all the way at the top and bottom, and back stitch at the bottom of that. Trim those thread tails when you get done, and then do the other side. Alright, stitching right along that 5/8 inch mark. Trimming those thread tails. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to press these seams open both at the shoulder and at the side seam. You should be able to just, since your center front will open, you should probably be able to use a pressing ham or a sleeve roll to press your shoulder seam open, as well as your side seam. So you're going to want to go ahead and press both of those. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now jump over and work on the sleeve. So if you want to take that break and go ahead and press those seams open, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and then just kind of make one trip over to the ironing board at a time. So as you can see, we have a front, the sleeve front, and we know that it's a sleeve front even if we remove this pattern piece because we have a one notch out here. And we know that this is the back side of the sleeve because we have the two notches identified there. So I can then go ahead and set my pattern pieces aside, but always within arm's reach so that I can get to them and reference the seam allowances if for any reason I forget. Now, as you can see, like, this is a pretty long curve here to fit in with our half scale bodice patterns. And the curved edge of most of these set-in sleeves measures more than the armhole circumference. Thus, what we have to do is we have to ease along this cap here between those notches. And then we'll pull the threads and we'll kind of do some very small gathering along this curved edge and have that fit into the armhole. And so what we first need to do is we need to place 2 rows of ease stitching in that seam allowance. The first one needs to be just along that stitch line, and I have mine marked with my my tracing paper. So I would recommend either using your marking pen or Tailor's chalk or some sort of other marking device. If you want to use your tracing paper, I'd recommend that. But go ahead and make sure that you identify that seam allowance there. And what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 rows of ease stitching. One is just going to be probably a 1/16 of an inch away from the seam line that we have marked, and then the second one is going to be 1/8 of an inch away from that, so very close to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to watch right through this circular part of my presser foot to make sure that I'm being guided properly. And so when we do ease stitching, we're not going to do any back stitching. We want to make sure that we have thread tails to start with so we have something to hang on to. So I'm going to line up my presser foot so that when I insert the needle, it goes in just about a 1/16 inch of away from that from that seam line that I have marked on here. Now where you're going to start just towards the inside, like so, towards the curve of the cap of your notches. We're going to be placing these E-stitch lines between both your notches, your back sleeve notch and your front sleeve notch. And we're only doing one sleeve at a time, so make sure that you're not sewing this double thickness. I have my other sleeve right over here. So again, we're not back stitching, and we're also going to want to lengthen our stitch. So go ahead and crank that up as long as it will go. I think on the machines they go until to a 4. So we're going to want to make sure that we have some longer stitches going here so that we can easily gather. Now you're going to want to go slow while you do this to make sure that you can stay as close as you can to that stitch line as possible. And just go slowly around that curve. And then I'm approaching that my second or my front notch, and I'm going to go ahead and stop and then pull that thread out and make sure that I have some decent thread tails to hang on to. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to repeat this step, and I'm going to be placing a row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch away, closer to the edge of the fabric than the first one. So I'm going to go ahead and hang on to those thread tails again, and I'm starting between notch and notch and putting in those E-stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and lower my needle in so that it's about 1/8 of an inch away, and I'm just going to slowly try to guide this fabric so that my stitches, the width between them is only about 1/8 of an inch. I'm just slowly moving this fabric around, letting the feed dogs move it as it should, and I'm just manipulating that fabric to go in a circle. Now I've completed it. I'm at my front notch now. I'm going to pull that out and make sure that I have some decent thread tails. Now what I need to do is I need to close the underarm portion of the sleeve. And so if we were going to put the sleeve on, I'll go ahead and put it right side out. If we were going to go ahead and put the sleeve on, this is the top of our cap, and this is the opening where our arm goes, and so we need to close this under in the underarm area, so kind of like in the armpit area. And so what we need to do is make sure that your thread tails are kind of sticking out the top, and so you're not going to accidentally grab them. And we need to close this underarm seam. So I'm going to go ahead and match up my edges here. I'm going to put a pin in just to keep everything in place. And I'm sewing this at 5/8 of an inch also. I'm going to go ahead and do some back stitching at the front and back of this seam. This is a fairly short seam because it's a short sleeve shirt, but if you have a longer sleeve that's either 3/4 length or a full shirt sleeve, then that seam's going to be a lot longer. Okay, now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to press this seam flat. And what I would do is I would take this time to go ahead and go over to the ironing board and press all of your seams open if you haven't done this yet. And you know, we're going to be putting in 2 sleeves. So I'm only going to demo doing the E-stitching on one. So I'm going to stop the camera and I'm going to go ahead and put my second 2 rows of E-stitching in between the notches on my other arm. And then I'm going to go ahead and go over to the iron and press all my seams open so that I'm ready to insert the sleeve into the armhole, and we're actually going to pin the armhole, or pin the sleeve cap area into the armhole of the bodice. So go ahead and do your second shirt or your second sleeve. Do those E-stitching rows, close up the underarm area, and then go ahead and press everything, and I'll meet you back here to go ahead and place that sleeve in the armhole.